Hello, everyone. I'm gonna do brief introductions so that you have a little bit of an opportunity to know more about our presenters, our co-presenters today, Laurie and Beth Cabrera. First, I want to welcome you. I hope you are having a fabulous, wonderful, well-being day so far. Yes. Okay. So that's a good thing. Just a little bit of a check-in. I'm Shamita Parker. I'm a staff member at George Mason University, and I'm actually jazzed to be having the opportunity to introduce Beth and Laurie because mindful leadership is something that I certainly pay a lot of attention to and really love, and obviously you all are interested in as well. So really an opportunity to talk about some of the work that they're doing, learn a little bit about that is certainly always a fantastic opportunity. So without further ado, Dr. Beth Cabrera is a senior scholar at the Center for Advancement of Wellbeing at George Mason University, and loves to help people build more joyful, meaningful lives. So there's no doubt that she's in great demand. She's an author, a researcher, and a speaker. She teaches individual strategies for achieving greater success and well-being, and we all know that in our fast-paced, furious, complex world, that's certainly something we want a little bit more of. So certainly a great resource. Her PhD is in industrial organizational psychology from Georgia Institute of Technology. She was on the faculty at the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid, one of Spain's top universities. So I'm feeling very lucky that we took her away, and now we have the pleasure of her knowledge and talent and skills. And there's just a lot of things. And I think you've got a book coming out.
We're coming out in August.
Fantastic. So we want to keep that on our radar as well. So just lots of great things from Beth, and then of course our co-presenter Laurie. Laurie, I was a little bit overwhelmed. I'll be honest when I looked at bio. Okay. I have a lot to remember here because there is a great depth of work, and it's fascinating and wonderful. She's a leadership and change consultant, a mindfulness certified teacher, an executive coach, and author. And what she's doing is fascinating in the sense of really marrying neuroscience and mindfulness into practical strategies that leaders can use in the workplace and business. And really bringing that in a way that makes sense about all this scientific gobbledygook that people can really take and make something out of. As a coach myself, I love to have an opportunity to learn from another coach. I'm so excited about that. And let's see, you live all over in Germany. You've done some fantastic work with different leadership firms and coaches and consultants. And you know what, I have to be honest, the one thing that totally I geeked out on is that you have did 20 years of mindfulness practice under time. So that is really amazing. And I'm not going to keep jabbering it because I want you to have a chance to learn and listen to them. So without further ado, Beth Cabrera.
Thank you all for coming. We're so excited to have you here. We realize that there's a lot of competition and there are a lot of great parallel sessions. So we're even more grateful that you chose to come and be with us today. Since we're talking about mindful leadership, we're going to talk about how mindful leadership helps to optimize performance of the leader and of everyone else in the organization. So before we get started actually talking about the content of our talk, Laurie's going to lead us in a brief centering exercise in a moment. And we're going to have to be moving back and forth because I don't think that works for us. So let me get out of that spotlight. Let me just put a card in front of this for a second. So yeah, I'm delighted you're here. I'm a certified teacher with the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, founded at Google. And so the practice that we're going to start with is something that we do with companies, and in particular Google, all over the world. So, and this is a practice that I just invite you to fully experience. Put anything that you have in your laps or hands down, and just get in a comfortable position. Posture can be a signal to us that we're going to center and kind of ground ourselves. So even getting in a mindful body position, which is just a combination balancing alertness and being relaxed. And I kind of do that with my spine. Let my spine be alert. You can put your hands on your lap if you like, and just feet flat on the floor if you can. And just feel yourself settle into your chair. So I'm going to invite the bell, and when I do that, you can use the bell as an anchor to start this practice, to listen to the sound of it all the way to the end. And after that, you can just
With your eyes, you can close them if you're comfortable. I like to do that because it minimizes my distractions. If not, you can gaze softly at the floor. Just begin by taking a long, slow, deep breath in. And feel a full exhale. Bring your attention to the breath. Just allow your mind and your thoughts to settle on your breath. And see if you can notice where you experience your breath most vividly. It might be your abdomen rising and falling. It might be your nostrils feeling the air come in. So just see where you notice it. And if you get distracted by sounds, the door, a thought, just return your attention to the breath, focusing on the place where it's most easily apparent for you. And just send your next breath all the way through your body down to the floor. Feel the stability of the floor beneath you, connecting yourself to the building, to the earth. We can get a lot of stability and grounding just by sending our breath all the way through and down. It's loud next door, but that's all part of the practice. That's the way life is. We always have things around us distracting us. We're cultivating the capacity to return our attention to an object of focus, wherever we might be. So one might say that these conditions are actually a little easier than life sometimes. So just bring that breath into the body and down through the feet to the feet. On your next breath, connect to your intention for why you chose to come to this breakout. There's so many wonderful breakouts, and there's a lot to learn and experience in all of them. So you were drawn here for a reason, so you connect your intention for coming to mindfulness with leaders in the workplace to your larger work in the world. Just bring that up for yourself. And as you settle and ground yourself, I invite you to let go of all that you know about mindfulness and leadership and the breath and emotional intelligence. Just be present for the next 90 minutes with a beginner's mind, with a clean slate, with an openness and receptivity that allows you to maybe learn something in a new way, to have a fresh experience. So just let go of the judging mind, which is actually a big part of mindfulness. So take one more cleansing breath in. Feel your body settle and ground. And then gently return your attention back to the room. Slowly opening your eyes. I'll invite the bell to bring us back.
then Laurie's going to talk to you a little bit about what we mean by mindfulness, what we mean by mindful leadership, and science behind it. Then I'll come back. Yes? No. Did they bring me another one? Or is there a handheld? If they can even have a handheld, I guess that's yeah. You requested to.
Can you hear me?
I'll also try to talk loud. So that should be fun. So then, Laura's going to tell us about, then we're going to come back to me and I'm going to talk about the benefits of mindful leadership particularly. We really are focusing on why is it so important for leaders in today's organizations to embrace mindfulness. And then we're going to both talk a little bit about cultivating mindfulness. Laurie's going to talk to you about a more formal practice of practicing our attention. And then I'm going to talk about ways we can bring mindfulness into our daily lives and into our work lives and daily practices that we can have to build in more mindful pauses throughout our day. So why mindfulness? Why is it so important right now in mindful leadership? And really, we're kind of at a point where it's, I guess, kind of a perfect storm for a need for mindfulness like we haven't had before. And that's a combination of what's happening in the workplace and in the world, combined with how our minds work. So it really has created a moment in time where we do need mindfulness more than I think we ever had before. So what's happening first in the workplace? In the workplace, we're experiencing an unprecedented rate of change. And the innovations that we have with our new technologies, the global 24/7 world that we find ourselves in, means we're working at this rate of change and innovation that we've never seen before. That Gary Hamel wrote a book, What Matters Now, talking about the innovation and competition and change that we're faced with in organizations. And one of his quotes is, the world is becoming more turbulent faster than organizations are becoming more resilient. So it really is a how do we keep up? And it's the first time that we've really been faced with this rate of change. So that's what's going on in organizations. But it's not just at work, it's in our lives in general. So all of you have little phones on you, and we have information overload, right? We have this information that we've never had before, and we're kind of in this constant partial attention because we have beeps and signals going off, and Arianna Huffington is very concerned about this. She's written her book Thrive, and in the Huffington Post, the third metric, talking a lot about this, and she says we're now a culture drowning in data, drowning in information, and starving for wisdom. Now, Herbert Simon is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and in the 70s, early 70s, he said a wealth of information leads to a poverty of attention. So that's something else that's going on in our world today. We have so much information coming at us all the time. How and where do we focus? So all of a sudden, learning to focus our attention in a better way, in a smarter way, and in being more intentional about focusing our attention is something we've never faced such a great need for. So we combine what's going on in the world, what's going on in organizations, with all of this change and all of this information overload with our minds and the way our minds work. So when we look at just some very basic characteristics of the neurobiology of being human, the first thing we have is a naturally wandering mind. So by nature, our thoughts jump from one topic to another, and we get one, and it pulls us out of where we are. So that's just by nature the way our minds work, that we kind of are always wandering and jumping from one thought to another, which at one point was maybe okay, but again, we combine that with all of this information coming, and it just kind of is this explosion, right, of wandering minds. We also have a survival brain. So there's, part of our brain that evolved from the very, very beginning was the part that kept us alive. Okay, and that was when we are threatened, we go into a state of alert, our minds go into a state of alert, and we have the fight, flight, or freeze, and we're looking for danger. And again, that kept us alive. That was important to notice the crouching saber-toothed tiger that was going to eat us, right? What happens today is we don't have the level of danger that we had when our brains started with that survival, but we have constant, what our brain perceives to be threats. So our brain doesn't distinguish really between that saber-toothed tiger and an incoming email That might be a client complaining about something, or might be something happened with one of our family members. So every little thing, every little piece of information that comes at us is a potential threat, and our brain sees it that way. So what we have now is kind of this chronic state of stress for many people, because we're always kind of in this state of alert, that there's so much coming at us that could be a potential threat. And the last one is the fact that we have limited cognitive capacity. Our brains are completely incapable of attending to all that is going on in the world. And that was even 50 years ago, before we didn't have all this barrage of stimuli in our worlds. So what our brain does to handle it is it likes to put things on autopilot. So the more things that we do in a routine way, that we repeat and do over and over, our brain puts that on autopilot, so it frees up cognitive capacity to do other things. So we don't have to think about brushing our teeth every morning. We don't have to think about every single turn we take to go to work every day. And that's absolutely vital for us to be able to live in this world. But what happens is, we've seen in organizations that require this constant change that we've never been faced with before, with a brain that would prefer to put things on autopilot and not have to react and change constantly. So it's all of these things coming together at the same time that really is causing this perfect storm and this perfect need for mindfulness that we have not seen before. That's why these companies and many, many others are embracing the idea of mindfulness. So all of these companies up here have some type of a mindfulness program. They teach courses in mindfulness, they have meditation rooms, yoga classes, some of them have mindful leadership programs. So this really is catching on, and a lot of organizations have realized we need help. Our leaders need help learning to focus in the world that we're faced with right now, and in the organizations that we're working with now. So that's why. Now I'm going to turn it over to Laurie. She's going to talk to you about what?
So let me know if you can't hear me. I'll try to project. 2 days ago, I was at the University of Maryland Smith School of Business at a talk with the CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi. And she talked about the challenges of being a CEO of this multinational company with a very diverse portfolio of products. And it's actually the very day that Heinz, my first client ever, announced that they were stepping up to the altar with Kraft. So it was very interesting to be with Indra that day. But Indra said, more than ever, and Beth just alluded to this, more than ever, business is so complex. And she used the phrase, it is moving breathtakingly fast. And she said the challenge for her and her leadership team and her organization is how do they, as individuals who show up for work every day, actually focus the mind? So that's really this question. It's a question of capacity. And her whole strategic initiative is called Performance with Purpose. And she's got 3 pieces to that, and they're all about sustainability. Human sustainability, talent sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And her question is, how can I increase the capacity of my people, my teams, and my organization so that we can focus and maintain our awareness, our attention on our strategic initiatives in the midst of this fast-moving, complex, uncertain, ambiguous world. So the good news is, Beth really laid it out, that it's really complex. And we're kind of wired to do really well, thousands of years ago. So here we are. So what do? And the answer to that, I know you can probably guess what I'm going to say, given the title of this talk, is mindfulness. And so mindfulness is really just answering the question, what can we do? And mindfulness is about that ability that we know we have to train our mind. We can actually train the brain. So I think about mindfulness as the ability to pay attention in a very intentional way in the present moment. I love the framework that Shama Shapiro, who's one of our teachers at Search Inside Yourself, She's the faculty for the teachers that go through the program. She really has come up with a framework in 2005 that talks about mindfulness is attention, intention, and attitude. Attention, we talked about where we're focusing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Intention, we heard a lot from Dan Pink this morning on purpose. It's really about being connected to the why. And I love that that's part of Shapiro's framework. And then the third piece is attitude. And that is really key. A lot of people think mindfulness is just about focusing attention, but it really has to do with this attitudinal quality of embodying openness and curiosity and receptivity. And that's why I actually brought that into that guided centering practice about what's your intention and hold open, an open, receptive mind. So another way to think about it, I really like from Dan Goleman, his newest book is about focusing. How many in the room have ever read any book by Dan Goleman? Emotional intelligence, focusing, working with emotional. So he's like Dan Pink. He is excellent at curating all the research that's out there and whipping it into a very translatable framework. That's what he does best. And his new book, Focusing, talks about awareness in 3 ways. And I really, really appreciate this. So mindfulness is the awareness of our inner experience. So our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, it's the inner landscape. What am I feeling right now? Right before I started to talk, like a few minutes ago, I noticed I was really nervous in my stomach. And I even noticed, and this is a new one on me, I even noticed my bottom lip was just starting to quiver. And I thought, usually I get the red cheeks, so this was kind of a new one, but that's the first part, inner awareness of self, inner awareness. And because I was dialing into that, I was able actually to do something about that. I actually grounded and centered myself right before I talked. The second piece is other awareness. So this connects to the whole emotional intelligence piece. It's our ability to notice, to resonate with what's happening with this person in front of me. What are they experiencing? What am I reading on their face? What are the nonverbals? So that you can, I know a lot of you are very trained in these fields of psychology and social science, and that's really that capacity for other awareness is the foundation for emotional intelligence. And then the third piece is systems awareness. And I actually do a lot of study and work with Otto Scharmer at the Presencing Institute at MIT, and he is fabulous in his theory and work around systems awareness and being so present to not just what's happening with me and with you, but what's happening in the field, what's happening in the environment. What are the trends that are happening? And he does a lot of great work with cultivating that capacity and helping leaders and organizations innovate because they're so on the pulse. They're sensing into what's emerging. So that's Goleman's framework. It's inner awareness, other awareness, system awareness. But I would be remiss if I did not bring up the classic quote, the classic definition from the father of secular mindfulness in the US, and that's Jon Kabat-Zinn. So this definition I just think is really all-encompassing. Jon Kabat-Zinn is really responsible, I think, for a lot of the great work and great research in mindfulness. So it's the awareness that arises, and that's a really key point, from paying attention in a particular way, in the present moment, on purpose, non-judgmentally, with openness and compassion. So in a particular way, now, in the here and now. So this is a slide from our Search Inside Yourself program, and one of my colleagues is here, Dr. Raj. I'm so happy to see him. And I love this slide because it really represents a very old definition of mindfulness coming from the Pali word bhavana, which means to cultivate. So mindfulness is about cultivating the skill and the state and the trait of mindfulness. It kind of starts out as a skill, but then ultimately it becomes more of something that's embodied, it's part of you. And it's a state that you can shift into. So I really love this because it actually tees up where I'm going next, which is the science. Because when I look at this, yes, I see a field that's being cultivated, but it also makes me think of how I have the opportunity to cultivate new pathways in my brain. So let's talk about science. I really like that Dan Pink talked about being nerdy. I thought that was really cool because I've become quite a neuroscience nerd in the last 2 years. We had to digest an awful lot of neuroscience at Search Inside Yourself. We have some of the scientists from Stanford on our board and actually as our faculty. So it's incredible, the explosion in neuroscientific papers. We're not going to drag you through that today, although it is really interesting. And if you leave me your card, or we can do a sign-up sheet, I can send you anything that if you have questions in any area about neuroscience, I can send that to you. But there's really 2 key things I want to share with you about the science. To take all the fabulous neuroscience and distill it down, the first thing I want to share is the idea that we are not stuck with the brains that we kind of cultivated and grew in the first 7 years of our life, like I was taught when I studied psychology at the university. So what we know just in the last 10 years, and that's because of the advance in technology with the functional MRI, we know that we can change the structure and function of our brain. Wow. I think this is some of the greatest news on the planet. So how do we know that? How many of you have ever been to London? Okay, I don't know if you remember those Byzantine streets, but there's 25,000 streets in London. And in order to become a cab driver, you have to take a test. Who knows the name of the test? It's got a cool name. All right, the name of the test is the knowledge. So you have to pass this test, and does anyone have an idea of how long it takes to pass this test? The knowledge. You have to know all 25,000 streets in London. Yes. It takes, on average, between 2 and 4 years to study for this test. So some really smart neuroscientists said, hey, what if we threw some of these London cabbies in the fMRI machine? Let's look at their brains. So they actually measured the brains of London cabbies before they studied, after they passed, and then actually some years down the road. And they noticed something really remarkable, that the hippocampus, which is that part of the brain that's responsible for memory and spatial awareness, is bigger than the average population in a London cab. So that was the first time, that was the first study where scientists said, wait a minute, look at that. They've repeatedly studied spatial awareness relationships and memorized a lot of information, and the hippocampus grew. So since then, there's been a lot of studies. One of the seminal ones in 2005 was from Sarah Lazar, and she noticed that studying really expert meditators, that expert meditators compared to controls had a thicker cortical layer, which is the bark around the brain. And they also had a bigger insula. And the insula is the part of the brain that is responsible for how in touch we are with our body and the sensations in our body. So just now when I was noticing that I had a fluttery stomach and my lip was, that's because I've been training that insula for a long time. I don't know, about 15 years ago, I was hiking in Northern California, and I had a tremendous amount of pain, and my husband had to get a Jeep and come in and get me and haul me out. And I went to the hospital, and the doctor, after a lot of exams, he said, you have non-malignant tumor, you have a tumor the size of a grapefruit in your body. And I was a hardworking executive at Accenture, traveling around the world, working more than 24 hours a day, it felt like. And for me, that story signals what it's like when we're so out of touch with our bodies. When we're not, we haven't honed in the attunement of our inner experience. So that's the insula. Now, I mean, I've come a long way. I didn't notice this massive thing, and now I can notice the quivering limb very easily. But so that's the opportunity, and that's important because where do emotions start from?
Thoughts.
That is what we thought for a very long time. They actually begin in the body. They arise in the body, and then they communicate through the thalamus to the brain, and then we create a thought. So the better we are at sensing into the emotion, the better we can be at realizing our current state and what we're sensing, and that leads right to decision making. There's a lot of mindfulness research on the connection of emotional awareness and decision making. So those are some ways to consider mindfulness. This is an interesting brain picture where we think about the neuroplasticity, and then we can change the structure and function. But the other piece I just want to mention that Beth talked about with the saber-toothed tiger and the survival brain is that we've got this part of our brain called the amygdala. How many have heard of the amygdala? It's getting a lot of press now. The amygdala is that little part inside, it's actually two, but we say the amygdala, and that amygdala is our central alarm system. So when we see that tiger, and nowadays when we get that email, or when our boss suddenly appears at our desk, or we perceive a threat in a meeting, the amygdala fires, and it senses a threat. But we've got this beautiful piece that came later in the newer brain, the prefrontal cortex. I always go like this because, I don't know, it connects me to the prefrontal cortex in the front. And, you know, when I teach kids, I taught 500 kids on Monday, mindfulness, and I always use Dan Siegel's hand model. We have if this is the brain, this is the brainstem, we have the amygdala, and then later came the prefrontal cortex, which is our planning, reasoning, and thinking brain that helps us make good choices. Whew, aren't we glad we have that, right? But when we get upset, and when we get triggered, we flip our lid. And that the amygdala is actually, it's faster than the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala can override the prefrontal cortex, and that's by design. So when the car is zipping out from nowhere and you need to leap out of the way, you leap out of the way. So that's all great, that helps us survive, but we perceive threats all the time that aren't threats. And Dan talked about some of the things that motivate us. They're the very same things that threaten us. So if you've done any research on David Rock's work from the Neuroleadership Institute, he talks about threats to status, threats to sense of control. You know, when someone comes in right over me, I got a new boss. That happened to one of my executive clients, coaching clients last week. He got a new boss, and he used to have a really wide domain, and this guy's right on top of him. So that's a threat to his autonomy, his independence, his sense of control. So those are the things that trigger the amygdala in the workplace today. So the good news is we can strengthen this circuitry. The PFC and amygdala circuitry is the heart of emotional intelligence. And we can strengthen that through mindfulness meditation. So we're going to talk about in a bit how to do that. Before that, Beth is going to do a really wonderful story around how is this heart of this brain and mindfulness, how is that the foundation of emotional intelligence? But before we do that, I want to leave you with this phase. Now, I actually saw a picture of Beth and Mathieu Ricard, that's who this is, in Switzerland earlier this year, wasn't it? So Mathieu Ricard is a molecular biologist, a wonderful French molecular biologist, who's also the poster child of contemplative neuroscience. And we've done so much research using his brain because it's so finely tuned. And what we learned is that we could actually measure Well-being. We can measure the sense of well-being in the mind. We call it the left prefrontal cortex tilt. But there's more activity on the left side of the prefrontal cortex when you're generating positive states of well-being, of compassion, of actually the compassion and empathy neural networks are a little bit different, but we can actually look in a brain and see the impact of long-term meditation. So Mathieu Ricard's resting state is practically this optimal state of well-being. I know for me, I find this really aspirational. It's part of my purpose, is how do I cultivate that in myself, and how do I help my clients do that?
Okay, so moving right along to the benefits. Okay, and so these are benefits that we get from being mindful, or outcomes of being mindful. And again, there's so many. This is a hot topic these days, again, because of what I explained earlier. It's now that we need this. So there is a lot of research being done on mindfulness, also because we can, with the fMRIs, we have the research to really see brain activity. So there's just been an explosion of research on mindfulness. And we could spend the next 5 hours talking to you about the research of the benefits in general of mindfulness. So we have less stress, more emotional control, we're better able to focus, concentration, which is focusing for a longer period of time. We have actually higher thresholds for pain. We don't feel pain like we do when we've been mindful or meditating. It reduces depression, we're more creative, more compassionate. Because of the focus, we learn better. So the list goes on and on and on. But we're here today to talk about organizations and workplaces. So we want to focus specifically on mindfulness in organizations and for leadership. Janice Martorano worked at General Mills, and she brought a mindfulness leadership program into General Mills. And so this is a picture of General Mills, of all of them sitting around meditating. And this is what her take on mindfulness in the workplace. She says it's about training our minds to be more focused, to see with clarity, to have spaciousness for creativity, and to feel connected. So those are a number of things that she feels are reasons we need mindful leaders. Laurie and I want to make it even more simple, and we want to focus on just 2 specific benefits of mindfulness for leaders. That were the things that we think really are the most important as a leader. And the first is a calm, clear mind. And this we've been alluding to when we talked about how when we get hijacked, our amygdala gets hijacked, the prefrontal cortex kind of goes away. So what we use for making decisions and for higher order cognitive functioning is not in control when we are emotionally triggered, when we are not calm. So one of the greatest things that we get from practicing mindfulness and becoming a more mindful leader is this sense of calm, which gives you a clarity to make smarter decisions. A lot of time I talk about the wandering mind, right? So when I talk about the wandering mind combined with the survival brain, which is a negativity focus, it's looking for what's going wrong, what are the potential threats. Many of us, in fact, there's a research that shows that we spend 47% of our time, our minds are wandering. And they've done that. Tom Rath, if you were in his talk, he talked about they send you texts throughout the day and say, what are you thinking about? They ask you what you're thinking about, and it's affective sampling. And then they say, how do you feel? And what they find is 47% of the time, we are somewhere else. And when we are wandering, we are less happy. We have more negative emotions. Then when we find people who are in the moment, in the present, they have more positive emotions. That's because we spend a lot of our time either ruminating about the past, something that went wrong, something we could have done differently, if we only shoulda, coulda, woulda, and that's really dredging up negative emotions very often. Or we worry about the future and what might happen. So we're worried about, are we going to get the bid? You know, is the client going to like the presentation? Are we going to hire the right person? I mean, they're just continually worrying about the future or lamenting a poor decision or something that went wrong in the past, right? And that's causing us to be in the state of alert that we talked about. Those are all potential threats, things that could go wrong. So we are not thinking clearly. I love the analogy of when we are mindful, it's like taking a snow globe. So when we're in the past and the future and we're worried about things, it's like the snow is everywhere, right? And being mindful really is when we're able to focus our attention on the present moment. Present moment is almost always mildly pleasant. Most of the time, mildly pleasant. It's like setting the snow globe down. And the snow settles. And that gives you a clarity. It allows you to listen to your intuition. Like she didn't notice she had a tumor, right? I mean, a lot of times we're running around, we don't even notice what we're feeling inside, right? And we don't even hear. And intuition is a really powerful thing that actually comes from experience. So it is really telling you something, usually, based on your experiences. So it's a good thing to be able to hear how you feel about something. So that clarity lets you hear your intuition, and it gives you better judgment, because it takes you from this, it puts that prefrontal cortex back, and you're thinking clearly. We also know when we're more positive, we're more expansive and open to new ideas and coming up with new solutions. So for many, many reasons, just being able to calm our mind gives us a clarity to be better leaders. We have better judgment and we make better decisions. So that's the first one. The second one is the emotional intelligence piece. And Laurie talked about Dan Goleman's book Focus, and he talks about emotional intelligence, so does Ming at Google. And this, it's really interesting. She alluded to a little bit. So what is, first, number one, how many of you have heard that emotional intelligence is good for leadership? That's kind of like out there now, right? And there's very clear research that says, what distinguishes really good, successful leaders from all of the rest is not their IQ, it's their emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? It starts with an awareness. So on that top level, emotional intelligence is an awareness of your own emotions and an awareness of other people's emotions. So when we're mindful and we're focused on the present moment, as Laurie mentioned, she noticed that she was nervous beforehand. That's from being present. That awareness comes from being here in the moment and mindful. We also notice other people's emotions. And we can read their nonverbal signals, and we can see that they're anxious or see that they're upset about something when we're in the moment, when we're mindful. And then the second step of emotional intelligence is using that information to respond in more appropriate ways, right? So it's either self-regulating our own behavior, or it's responding, let's say we have empathy for an employee, then we're able to act compassionately and do something to help them because we, first of all, understand what they need. So let's look at the first part, this self-awareness. Typically, many of us go through the day and not even aware of those emotions that, as Laurie said, are coming up through the body. We're in our thinking mode, maybe, and so we're not even seeing what's coming up in the body. And many times, when we're not aware of our emotions, that they control our behavior. So we do things and say things based on these emotions we're feeling without really processing whether that was the right thing to do or say. So you get a stimulus, causes an emotional reaction, and we react. Has anyone here ever done or said something in a moment today that you might have regretted? That's totally normal, and that's what happens when we're not aware. It's just an emotional reaction. What happens with mindfulness is really astounding, because when we are in the moment and we are aware of our emotions, it's just a split second that it gives us, rather than to react blindly, to choose a more appropriate response. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it widens the gap. So we have emotions that are going across us rather than being our emotion, rather than being angry and doing something out of the anger. We have that split second that we're like, wow, what that person said caused me to feel angry. I realize it's an emotion and it's going to go away. So how I choose to react is different. And so we have that space that this emotional intelligence, this awareness gives us the freedom to choose our response. Okay, so we have this awareness and that momentary split second that it gives us to separate ourselves from that awareness, from that emotion, and choose how we're going to respond. Imagine a leader who is more in control of a situation, right? It gives you this control over your behavior that can be very powerful as a leader. And to know that I can go into any difficult situation because I'm going to be in control, and I'm going to know how to react in the most appropriate way, and I'm not going to be, have my emotions run away with me, right? So that's a lot of power that we get from the self-awareness piece of being mindful. And the second one is looking at the other awareness. And so if you're in the moment, when you have conversations with people, you can have empathy because you understand how they're reacting. So you're not halfway looking at your phone when somebody's telling you something. You put your computer down, and so maybe you're telling someone that they've been passed over for this really exciting assignment that they were really looking forward to doing, right? And so rather than just saying, well, it's not your turn, so-and-so's doing it this time, you're able to see the reaction, and you can see the disappointment, or you can see the frustration. And then you're able to respond. And you're able to use your compassion and say, let me explain to you why Tom got it and you didn't. And let me tell you what maybe you can do so that the next time we choose you for this assignment, right? You can act compassionately because you saw the reaction of that person. If you're not mindful in the moment, that moment's gone because you didn't even notice, right? Or you were on to the next thing. So it's about being able to respond compassionately. And I will tell you something. You mentioned I was with Matthew Ricard in January, and he was with Tanya Singer, who's a neuroscientist at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and they were telling us a story of some research that she did with Matthew. He gets, everybody wants to do research on him to see how this crazy brain works. So she hooked him up and put him inside of an fMRI machine, and she asked him to think about empathy, to meditate on empathy for other people. So think about people's suffering and understand that and really feel that. So he did it, and he came out, and at the dinner table he was telling us, he was like, it was awful, it was torture, it was terrible, because he was just in there thinking about suffering and all this. And she measured the activity of his brain and said the region that's associated with pain and unpleasantness was activated the whole time that he was in there being empathetic. Then she put him back in and said, this time I'd like you to meditate on compassion. So compassion is really, you understand that there is suffering, but you really quickly move on to, I want to alleviate the suffering. How can I help? What can I do to make the suffering better, right? And even if it's just frustration from being passed over for a position or for a task or something. But so she put him back in, and he came out, he said it was wonderful. I was feeling all of this compassion for all of these people, and a completely different area of his brain lit up. The area associated with love and affiliation. Two very different parts of the brain. So again, as a leader, it's good to have the mindful empathy, but it's better to take it a step further. And another reason, so it's better for you as a leader, right, to be thinking, how can I help? I see concern. And maybe you told the person that you do want them to have this amazing stretch assignment, and you see immediately fear and anxiety, right? And you thought it would be great. But if you're really mindful with that person when you talk to them about it, and then you can help to assuage their fears and say, this is why I gave you this. This is why I think you'll be good for this. This is the experience you have that's going to help you be successful. So whatever it is, you're able to be compassionate and react to that. But one of the greatest things that compassion gives us as a leader is it builds trust. And we know that one of the number one most important characteristics of a leader is trust. And we also know that leaders who are benevolent, who show that they care about somebody, that's the number one way to build trust. If I know that you have my best interest at heart, and you demonstrate by being compassionate that you care about me, then you're a great leader. And I will follow you, and I trust you. So it's another reason to be a mindful leader, is you have the empathy, which leads to compassion, which is building trust. So you have another story, I think, to follow up with that. To conclude with,
Does anyone know who this guy is? Have you ever seen him before? He was the guy I mentioned earlier. We call him Meng, Che Ming Tan. He was employee 107 at Google, and he had some time on his hands because Google used to give employees a day a week where they could do anything they wanted. I'm not sure if they still do that, Raj, but they could create whatever project that they thought was the most important thing. And Meng, being an engineer, realized, and it wasn't too hard for him to realize, that engineers are not the greatest at emotional intelligence. So he set out to come up with a program for these brilliant, bright, impatient, quick-moving, innovative engineers at Google that could increase their emotional intelligence. And he was a long-time meditator, and he figured out that actually the processes that are happening when he was mindfully meditating, when he was practicing mindfulness, was very similar to the foundational competency of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. Mindfulness, awareness, they're kind of equal. So he brought in Daniel Goleman, who came up with that framework that you saw, and Goleman said, yeah, well, I don't put that in my book, but I'm actually a long-time mindfulness practitioner too, and yes, mindfulness and awareness cultivate the same thing. And since mindfulness and meditation is trainable, then self-awareness is trainable. Therefore, we can start to train emotional intelligence. This was the big breakthrough of the Google program. And there's a brand new book that just came out, I really recommend, by David Gellis, a New York Times reporter, called Mindful Work. So if you're interested in this subject, this is an excellent book. And another reason I really like the book is he talks a lot about Meng and this guy and Meng's program on Search Inside Yourself. So you can read more about it in there. But what I want to mention here about benefits of mindfulness in the workplace is Meng was speaking with us a few months ago, and he said for him, the greatest thing that has come out of all this work, so now he's got this program, it's been delivered all over the world, he started a separate company called Search Inside Yourself, now all kinds of companies are doing it, but for him personally, the greatest benefit is increased confidence. And he attributes that increased confidence to three things. The first is his awareness. He knows himself so well that he's able to predict how he'll show up when he's speaking at the UN. He was just nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize this year. So, or when he's in a difficult conversation, or when he's on TV. So he's got this really rich self-awareness, and he's also able to tap into that in the moment. And that makes him really confident. The second piece is what he calls equanimity. You can think of as emotional balance. But he's got such a capacity for being in a difficult situation, or in a really joyful situation, or a grieving situation, or a rug pulled out from underneath him situation, that he knows, because of his deep mindfulness practice, that he can manage that with that situation with a balance. He's not thrown off. He's not going to react. He's trained himself so much to just maintain that equilibrium. And that gives him a deep sense of confidence where he can really go into any situation. And I've noticed that in my own personal work in organizations and companies, and even in my life, with my husband and with my 11-year-old daughter. And there's these little moments all the time, but I notice that I'm much more spacious. I'm much more able to not be rocked. And that gives me a really rounded confidence. And then the third piece, which I really think is so interesting, the third reason he's more confident is he's got a greater capacity to recover. And he uses a metaphor of riding a bike. He says, when we're riding a bike, we're not really riding a bike just on a straight line. We're kind of constantly correcting, right? We're like, and that's kind of what we're talking about with this capacity to recover, is when I'm triggered, or even just now, when that happened right before I talked to you guys, I can, okay, I have the awareness, nervous, lip, stomach, okay, and then I could ground myself. And I was grounding myself not only because I have the skill of knowing how to ground myself, but because I have deepened that neural pathway in the brain. You know, that I've trained it and trained it. So it's easier for my brain to go back into that now than it was 15 years ago. So that's this benefit that I wanted to tell you in the story of May, is the confidence that a leader gets by cultivating this capacity. So, how do we do that? How do we become more mindful as leaders? If you leave here with one takeaway of how to go do it, I'd like to have you consider, and just be your own laboratory. Don't take anything, no matter what Beth and I tell you, and it's all, I think it is all really good, but no matter what we tell you, the thing about mindfulness is it's not about the science, it's not about the papers, it's not about the book, it's about you as a laboratory. You are running an experiment in your own body, your own mind, your own life. So just go experiment. And a way to do that that's very simple is training your attention. And initially I did that with the bell. I trained your attention of sound. And then we trained attention on the breath. So just practice training your attention. And I'll give you a formal way to do it, and Beth will give you some informal ways to do it. So that's kind of a key takeaway that I want to leave you with. So let's try another practice. Are you guys up for another experiment and experimenting with what does it mean to be mindful? So this one we're going to go a little bit longer, and we're going to go a little bit deeper, a little bit more work on this one. So I invite you to sit like a majestic mountain, stable, in your mindful body, alert, relaxed, feet flat on the floor. I like to start with the bell. That's just the training that I've had. We always start with the bell. And for me, it's almost a way that just brings me right back to center. I actually started just as a homeroom parent in the 4th grade with my daughter last year, teaching in her class, just attention to breath. And the kids really got into it. Now I'm teaching the whole school and all the faculty, but a lot of the parents have bought bells for the teachers, and the teachers love it, because this whole 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, and hand up, you hear me, all that's gone. And they just sound the bell and the kids are quiet. In fact, the kids take turns being bell master for the day. So you can also get a bell app on your phone or on your computer and have it sound during the day when you're at work. So just invite you to experiment. Okay, so fasten your seatbelts. So we'll start by taking 3 slow breaths. Bring your attention to your breath in a very natural way. Just breathe naturally. You're not trying to change it or make it different. And just send that breath all the way through your body. And again, you can ground yourself by sending that breath through the body to the floor. If you like, you can quietly say to yourself, in, out. And you don't get too focused on the words, but they can support you in bringing your attention to your breath. In, out. If thoughts or images arise, just Let them flow by. They can come and go without you chasing after them. It's almost as if you're sitting on the bank of a river and there's a stream of thoughts just flowing in front of you. And the thoughts are almost like little boats just going by. You don't have to chase. You just notice and let go. If something arises that takes your attention away, it could be the sound of the speaker next door. It could be something you remembered all of a sudden that you have to do this evening, or a pang in your right foot. That's all right. Just gently notice that and bring your attention back to the breath. All meditators are hijacked sometimes by thoughts and emotions, sensations. So what we're practicing is attention. We're practicing bringing our attention back. And that is the practice of mindfulness. You can also try labeling what you're noticing. If you notice the thoughts, you can say, thinking, foot tingling, laughter. We are cultivating the mind's ability to notice our direct experience. And it's actually in the direct experience where we can access joy and happiness. So we're training ourselves to notice the direct experience. So take a deep cleansing breath. And I want you to bring to mind an experience in the workplace, if you like, where you're having a difficult situation with someone. Maybe there's a conversation that needs to be had, and it hasn't occurred yet. Maybe there's a friction between you and someone else. And if one doesn't come to mind at work, you can think of one in your personal life, but just bring that experience to mind. You can see that person in front of you. Hold an image of their face in your mind's eye. And notice what you're feeling in your body. Bring up all the feelings. Just allow that space, that spaciousness to just hold those feelings. And you might be thinking about what they did or said or didn't do that created this rub, this tension. And now I invite you to step into the shoes of the other person and look out at the situation and look at yourself through their eyes. How might they be seeing the same situation? How are they feeling? What's arising for them? And now, I invite you to consider, back from your own perspective, coming back into your own point of view, what would be the kindest, most compassionate response you could make in this situation? I'm not saying you have to take the action. or you have to make the comment. But what would the kindest response possibly be in this situation that would alleviate any of this emotional uncomfortableness or suffering or pain even in this situation? Just kind of bring that up. Think about that action. And allow that to just fill you out in your thoughts, in your heart, in your body. So you can even, we'll just start bringing this to a close by putting your hand on your heart if you like and just connecting with the goodness that's in you. We all have an innate capacity for empathy. We're born with it. So just connect to that. We're cultivating that. We're cultivating our compassion, our desire to alleviate suffering in ourselves and others. So just take a couple of deep breaths from this place. And when you're ready, just come back to the room. Bring your awareness and attention right back here to Salon 7, Mindful Leadership Breakout Session. So, what did you notice? It's kind of sometimes hard to share right before coming out of that. But any reflections about that practice? Observations?
Fun to do after lunch.
It's fun to do after lunch. Because did you notice a lot of grounding and processing and digesting?
It brought me to a deep place of relaxation.
A deep place of relaxation. And what did that feel like for you?
Well, I could actually even
Yeah, it can bring us close to sleepiness. And sometimes, just like my experience on the hike, by stopping and becoming still, we realize what we need. We might need more sleep, or we might be hungry, or we might be full, in Steve's case.
But the anxiety is less true.
Less anxiety?
I was thinking about something I shared. So for me, because I practice meditation, I haven't been thinking about in the forefront of my mind about a particular situation, but when I went into the meditative state, it was the thing that rose to the top. And so devoid of any emotional responses, I was like, okay, because when you said when you're not mindful in the body, our emotions are actually things driving us.
Yeah.
And we're not really mindful of that. So
Right.
that's cool.
You know, I really, I don't know if you heard her comment, but one thing I appreciate is, I heard a new phrase last week. I love it. It's called time in. You know, instead of time out. And I used that when I taught this elementary school the other day. I taught them take 1 and take 5. And I said, this is time in. I said, how often do we get that? So sometimes in this time in, that's when insights arise. And in my mindfulness teacher, he talks a lot about insight, and I do insight meditation, but it's to create that space that Beth was talking about, so that we can actually have those insights. Other comments? Yes.
I'm having friction with a colleague, and that arose. I found that it was a little bit hard to offer the kindest thing that I could do. What came first was not the kindest thing that I could do. Per se. What really helped was connecting with my own goodness.
Thank you so much for that.
That's great. So that helps.
Beautiful. I really love Tara Brock, and if anyone who lives
yes.
in the DC area, we are all so fortunate that we can go to her on Wednesday night in Bethesda, Maryland. But She's also online. But Tara Brach teaches the point you just made. Sometimes it's too big of a leap to offer kindness or good wishes to someone that you're in a situation with. And if we can just offer it to ourselves, that's a really impactful step, right? It's all part of cultivating that emotional intelligence and expanding our capacity to, over time, connect. Oh, one more comment, please.
It's just interesting because I feel oftentimes it's easier to flip, to offer compassion to others. And that as we're watching ourselves in our minds, the state of confusion.
Yes.
that unless we have that gentleness with ourselves, it can be a very disturbing process if we're not loving with ourselves.
Well, I really love this comment because when you start practicing mindfulness, one of the cues you can use, when I said notice your breath, notice any distractions, another one is notice the tone that you use to yourself. So when you're meditating, and some people say, I can't meditate, I get that wrong, I can't concentrate, I get thoughts all the time. Well, notice how you're talking to yourself. Is it harsh? Is it critical? Is it judgmental? And that's often a clue of our mindset. And usually we're harder on ourselves than others. But what I've noticed in my own practice is as I've become more gentle to myself, I have become much more gentle to others, and much more kind, and much more forgiving, and much less judgmental. So it's really starting with training the self-compassion so that we can be different in the world. So what we're going to do now is talk very concretely. That was the experiential part of cultivating mindfulness. Now we're going to give you kind of two buckets of how to go do it. The first is dedicated practice time. So that's what we just did. We practiced meditation. And that just means if it's 5 minutes a day for you, if it's 10 minutes a day, if it's 1 minute a day, but it's dedicating time and it helps for me to do it in a routine way. And there's a lot of ways you can do it. You can do it by yourself, or you can have support of audios and wonderful. There's so much on the internet that's free. There's scripts. There's all kinds of things. So just what you're doing is you're going to the gym. You're taking the brain to the gym. But that's not the only way to get healthy, right? We can exercise by parking our car really far away and exercising throughout the day. So the other bucket of practice is informal mindfulness and action practices. I will leave you with these couple of tips for meditation. If you can breathe, you can meditate, right? We're just practicing attention on the breath as one anchor. It's exercise for your mind. You can do it anywhere, anytime. I did it in the bathroom down the hall before I came in here, just a couple of minutes of breathing. Do less than you can. That's a point that I love from Beth. She says, you know what, if you think you can do 5 minutes, do 2. I think that's one of those principles of life, right? You think you're going to eat 5 vegetables a day, eat 3. Just create the small wins that Dan Pink was talking about. And what's our final one? We just talked about, thank you for bringing these points up, about being kind to yourself. So this is kind of our summation of what we've noticed as tips to help us practice.
Okay, so that was the formal way of training our attention. And again, if you have any kind of a practice like that, it will come with you every day. You will be more calm throughout your day. But there are also ways to try to build into your day more moments of mindfulness. Because what happens is we leave this wonderful space and we go back out into the world and life gets in the way and we just start living our life and we don't always remember to take these mindful pauses. So that's what we want to talk about today. And just several suggestions for things that you can do throughout your day just to be a little more mindful. And the first one is just to slow down. I mean, the whole idea of being in the present moment and noticing what's around. When we're rushing, like most of us are, rushing from one meeting to the next, rushing in the car, driving fast, walking fast, talking fast, we're not noticing. And I'm not saying don't work and just walk around all day really slowly. I mean, even if you take 2 minutes longer, just 2 minutes longer to get from one place to the other. When you're driving, if you actually try to get off of autopilot and notice what's around you outside of the car, we often don't even do that. So just slowing down a little bit in everything you do will kind of automatically let you be more in the moment and notice what's going on. Savoring your meals. How many of you have ever done or heard about when you're meditating, looking at the raisin and taking an hour to I'm not saying that. That's wonderful if you want to try that. But what I'm saying is, another question, how many of you, when lunch is over, you look down at your plate and you're like, oh my God, it's empty. My plate is empty. I don't have any recollection of having just had lunch. I was rushing to get through lunch, to get back to work. It's like, wow, I started with a full plate. So I'm just saying, maybe even when you sit down, just take another mindful pause and smell your food and look at the colors. Maybe be thankful that you have 3 meals a day. Just a moment of being mindful about the food in front of you before you start to eat. And take that as long as you can, but just a little bit of mindfulness during our meals. Number 1 of everything is do not multitask. Okay, that is the antithesis of being mindful. And if you think you're multitasking, I'll just make sure you know now that you are not, because your mind can only do one thing at once. So if you think you're multitasking, your mind is just shuffling back and forth, shifting back and forth, back and forth. You're not focusing on anything. You're not paying attention to anything that you're doing. You're partially attending to different things. You're not focused and you're being completely ineffective. Trust me, it's not the best way to do things. So from just a productivity point of view, it's not good, but from mindfulness point of view, and this means, how many of you have notifications on your phone or your computer and you hear a little noise or even a vibration?
Yeah.
Turn them off right now. Don't do that, because that is ripping your mind out of the present moment. Even if you're like, well, I didn't look at it. Oh, but your mind is there. That's a potential threat, or maybe it's even some good news that maybe, your mind has been ripped out of the present moment and is thinking about what that might be and when you're going to have time to check it. So what you really need to do is schedule times throughout the day that you will check your text, that you will check your emails, and when you're not in that moment, then do what you're doing. So whatever, and if it's having a conversation with somebody, really be there with that person in the conversation. There's Sherry Turkle, who works at MIT and does fascinating research with technology and families. She has found in her research that just having a cell phone on the table, even turned down, you don't ever look at it, changes completely the nature of a conversation. It keeps it at a very superficial level. She's analyzed conversations and they do not go any deeper because somebody's mind is on that phone thinking, when are we going to be interrupted? So it's very important to not multitask, to decide in each moment what you will focus on doing and do that in that moment. Outside, just being in nature, a lot of research shows that nature is so vast and there's so much going on in nature that it really does pull us into the moment a lot of times. And so if you can eat lunch outside, if you can take a break and go for a walk, now that we might have spring and we might have better weather soon, not tomorrow, not today, but it might come, take advantage of that and spend time outside as much as you can. That really does naturally bring you into mindfulness and into the moment. One of my favorite ones is the idea of using transitions as cues, because again, we get out in our day and we just forget to be mindful. We get, busy with what we're doing. The best way to establish a new habit is to connect that new behavior to something you already do automatically. That's a way to kind of not have to think about it, to build it automatically into your day. So take a transition or a cue, something that you already do in your day, and say, every time I do this, I'm going to build in a little mindful pause. So that could be every time you sit down to your computer to work. You sit down, you're about to work, oh wait, I'm going to be mindful. And I'm going to just breathe for a couple of minutes. Just a few minutes, maybe 1 minute, but I'm going to be mindful. And so that's a few times throughout the day. And it can be when you're driving, every time you drive up and you stop your car, you park your car. We're usually late rushing out here. So try to leave a minute earlier. But just, you could use that as several times throughout your day. Each time you park your car, or if you're at a red light. Although I did tell somebody this, and at the red light she said, and then everybody started honking at me. I was like, you might have to leave your eyes open. But, you know, instead of being frustrated every time you're stuck in traffic at a red light, you can think, what a gift. What a gift. I'm sitting here and I have a moment to just be. You know, we don't get a lot of those gifts throughout the day, so if you just kind of reframe it and say, I'm going to be mindful every time I'm stuck at a red light. The stop is a little exercise. This is what in those moments you can do. Very simple little exercise by way of kind of remembering. The S is to stop, to take that mindful pause. So when you're at the red light, or when you are getting ready to work, or whatever that moment of transition is, just stop, and then take a few deep breaths. And it's amazing, even just observe how your parasympathetic nervous system immediately kicks in. Just with 2 long, deep breaths, you immediately start to feel calm. Your whole body notices it. And then observe. So this is what we've been doing in our more formal practices too, but just observe your feelings. How are you? Are you nervous? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Are you dwelling on something in the past? You can say, okay, snap out of that, right? Just kind of check in. Even do you feel uncomfortable or there's a pain somewhere? And then you can proceed. So this literally, you know, you have time for this. This can be as short as a minute or 2 minutes that you can do a number of times throughout your day. Just to remember to build that in to your day. And so throughout your day, you're remembering to have these mindful pauses. In addition to the practice, that's going to also, you know, create a more mindful state of mind throughout your day. So I think I'm going to skip and just ask the last questions, because we really feel strongly about, we hope you've learned a lot today. We hope you've enjoyed it and you're excited about some of the things you've learned, but it's not going to do any good if you just go home and say, wasn't that a fun conference and didn't we learn a lot? Okay, it's about putting it into practice. So we want a commitment from all of you to make some kind of a change in your life, right? And we would ask to consider 1 or 2 or both of these, you know. Is there just one thing? Because we've told you a lot, right? And if you try to do it all, you won't do it at all. So maybe pick one thing that you'd like to try to start doing. You can write that down or tell your neighbor as you're walking out. So I challenge you to ask the person that you see walking out, what's the one thing you're going to do? Okay? Or if you prefer to stop, like that whole multitasking thing, that's a real big one. If you're going to try to stop doing something, just pick something that you would like to either start or stop doing based on what you've learned today. And now we have just a minute or 2 for questions, right? Or comments.
I have one. I thought this was just very, very good, very helpful.
Thank you.
I noticed something my daughter-in-law is doing, and I applaud her. I have a 4-year-old grandson. And when he would get upset, I saw her the other day and said, now what are you supposed to do? And then he closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths.
You did a time in. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
and so
That's
just
great.
imagine
Have a
if
4-year-old do
it
that.
was in schools widely, what it would do to learning conflict in school, kids being more accepting of each other and their differences.
And they are starting with
Yes.
exciting. Richie Davidson's doing it. Blonde, what's blonde? Goldie Hawn. Blondie Goldie Hawn. That was there. She has a foundation doing this in schools. And so just imagine, you know, for all of us, I think it can really change our lives. It personally has changed my life. But imagine if we had had this when we were younger, right?
Yeah.
Going up through schools and everything, how great that would have been. So yeah, we could, yes.
To echo what she said at the beginning was just thank you so much, because what I wrote on my evaluation form, and I'm glad that I came here, is in corporations and organizations, it is beyond exciting to now have what I think has always been seen as this spiritual guru thing that yogis do, but to really making it so much more applicable to everyday life and kind of demystifying what mindfulness is, because it really is what connects us to one another and just kind of opens up this whole new world to making work fun, and you know, you actually walk in now feeling more in control. And thank you for that great tip about what increased that gentleman's confidence.
Yeah.
Because not only is it giving us something to practice, but by example now, We
Yeah.
didn't actually have a real solution
Right.
for our team members and other people in our organizations as to how we can now have that paradigm shift in our different company culture.
And there is a ripple effect, and you may not be able to, again, we're being realistic, we know you can't maybe go to work on Monday and go to your boss and say, we need to be mindful and start meditating, right? You can try it, but what actually can happen is if you embody this and you start doing this, somebody's gonna say, what are you drinking, man? What is this? You know, they're
want
gonna
some of that.
see a change.
That Harry Met Sally
And they're
effect.
gonna say, oh, you're so calm and in control and, you know, and handling these situations like I've never seen you. You know, what are you doing? And that will cause a ripple effect, and people will come to you and want it rather than trying to, you know, tell them that they need to meditate, because that's not always the best. Yeah.
I also wanted to say I really liked the part of the confidence, because I've taken a meditation class, but I never heard that particular way of phrasing it. And I can kind of connect it back to, like, I have the ability, I know that I can
Yes.
do it, stop for that 1 second.
I can do that.
Like, I can do
Isn't that powerful? That's
It's,
like,
anyway, so thank you for that.
I'm going to share that back with Meg because that was a talk he gave to his 30 teachers after we went through a year-long training. It was a very personal talk, and I took notes, and it really affected me. And I thought, wow, to go through life with more confidence because I have self-mastery.
Yeah.
That's really exciting to me. So thanks for.
So thank you and thank him.
Yes?
This has been very, very helpful. I'm curious, with the systems background, if I begin to change my behavior in the workplace, if I take that moment and I respond differently, I'm curious whether the other person who's used to give and take with me is not going to try what we had before. And for all of us to be aware of that, people don't
They
just
do.
automatically
Right.
say, wow, you're different. Why is that?
And you know where
That's
it's the
very
hardest?
uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable.
At home.
Someone initially-
It's the hardest with your family of origin. So you might come back, you know, Zen at Thanksgiving, and they're not even, they might not even see it, right? Because we have these autopilot movies on each other.
I'm suggesting something different, which is they will reinforce their old behavior.
Yeah, and try to get you to be your old self.
To keep
Yeah.
what you have
Yeah.
with them.
Like
And to
That's
be aware of
stimulus
that.
response.
You have to be aware of that and then compose for yourself.
Yeah.
Just see through.
And that gives you more practice. So it's all, you know, and when you encounter those situations, again, it gives you a chance to practice what you've learned, right? I mean, and I like all of this, when we do it and we're distracted, and every time I get distracted, I'm like, oh, can't do it, can't, you know. And then it dawned on me that every single time I got distracted in meditation, I was practicing more. It's like a good thing.
Yeah.
Because
It's another
it's
practice.
the practice of distraction and coming back is exactly what it's about.
Yeah.
So when you're, you know, I would like have what I called a bad day of meditation because I was distracted the whole time, and then I kept saying, oh, that was a good day. I got extra reps, right? Lots of practice that day. Exactly. So these challenging moments are just an opportunity.
Right. It reminds me that in the meditative part of it is not to do it without expectation. So, because somebody else can show up as they do, and I don't expect them to embrace it.
They don't have to
anything,
change, right? Yeah.
That's really big stuff,
I
isn't
like
it?
that she said it's more reps, because I think that the big misconception I know for me when I first started practicing is if I didn't have that nirvana experience, then I had a bad
Then you
mental
can't do
day.
it, right.
When actually it's the total opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's how I was kind of getting.
Good day if you weren't really
So,
practicing.
you know, there's a great teaching that I recently heard about that, and it's mindfulness isn't necessarily about getting to that blissful state. We're not striving for the blissful state. We're trying to notice what state we're in. And that could be anything. Sadness, anxiety. We're just noticing what's present. So that's a great point.
I'm like, tweetable now.
Yeah, tweetable. So thank you so much, y'all.